The scariest stories are the ones no one meant to tell. They begin in whispers, passed over diner counters or through static-filled phone calls, and by the time they reach you, they're already half-rotted with doubt. This one started like that, with a forgotten newspaper clipping folded inside a library book. Its ink bled into the paper like a bruise. It was dated November 3, 1978, from a town most maps no longer show. The headline read, "Family of 4 vanishes, home found intact." Below it, a black and white photograph showed a 2-story house with boarded windows and a sagging porch. Someone had drawn a faint circle around the front door, in what looked like pencil, but when I rubbed at it, the mark didn't smudge. It was pressed into the paper, as if carved. The details were sparse. The Marsh family, parents, 2 children, had reportedly eaten dinner that evening. Neighbors saw the lights flicker just after 9. When police entered the next morning, everything was in its place. The television still humming, plates half cleaned, chairs pushed back. The only thing missing was the family. I should have stopped there. I should have let the clipping yellow into dust like every other strange footnote of small-town tragedy. But curiosity has a way of calling your name when it shouldn't. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, something else answers back. The story began, as most obsessions do, with something small and forgettable. I was sorting through boxes of discarded papers at the local university archives, chasing a lead for an article about unsolved disappearances, when a thin, yellowed envelope slid out from between 2 outdated census reports. The envelope had no name, no address, just the words "keep for record" written in tight, slanted handwriting. Inside were 3 newspaper clippings, a Polaroid photograph, and a letter that smelled faintly of smoke. The photograph was of a house, old even then, its white paint blistered and peeling, a child's tricycle lying on its side in the dirt. Something about it pulled at me, the way certain melodies do, familiar and wrong at the same time. I read the first clipping. It was from 1978, describing the unexplained disappearance of the Marsh family from a town I had never heard of. The second article, dated a few weeks later, reported that the property had been sealed and condemned. The third was just a follow-up, a brief mention of strange electrical disturbances near the house. It was the letter that made me pause. It wasn't signed, but it read like a confession. The writer claimed to have been one of the officers who first entered the Marsh house. He described the dinner plates left on the table, the smell of burnt copper in the air, and a low, rhythmic clicking that no one could locate. The final line was smudged but still legible: "We shouldn't have gone inside." The walls were still listening. I don't know what I expected to feel reading it, disbelief, maybe. But instead, there was that quiet, crawling awareness that comes when you realize you've found something that was never meant to be found. I typed the town's name into a search bar and came up with nothing. No maps, no census data, not even a reference in historical directories. It was as though the place had been erased. I spent the rest of the night combing through microfilm reels, looking for more, and when I finally stood up, the sky outside had turned the bruised color of dawn. I could have left it there, called it a dead end, but the photograph was still on my desk, the tricycle tilted toward the shadow of the front porch as though it was waiting for someone to come back and set it upright. The road to the town wasn't on any current map, but a librarian with a long memory drew it for me on the back of a receipt, her pen trembling as she did. It was a single, crooked line branching off the highway, ending in a circle. "Don't stay after dark," she murmured, and when I looked up, she'd already turned away. I drove out 2 days later, the envelope of clippings on the passenger seat, the sky the dull color of tin. After an hour, the radio began to hiss with static, and my phone lost its signal. The road narrowed to cracked asphalt and then to gravel, lined with skeletal trees that pressed in close as if listening. When I finally reached the place, I almost didn't see it at first. The house seemed to absorb the light around it. It stood at the edge of a clearing, slumped and forgotten, the boards bowed inward as though the structure itself was exhaling. The windows were covered with warped plywood, but the nails looked new, gleaming faintly despite the rot. The air had that dense, charged stillness that comes before a thunderstorm, but the sky above was empty, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. I left the car running and walked toward the porch, feeling the gravel crunch beneath my shoes. Every few steps, my phone flickered back to life, showing the time as 9 p.m., frozen no matter how long I stood there. The locals I met at the gas station an hour earlier had warned me about the place. They didn't tell stories so much as hints, people hearing laughter through the trees, dogs refusing to cross the property line, a repair crew that once tried to restore the house only to abandon it within a day. One man, the oldest of the group, told me his brother's truck had stalled in the same spot I was now standing. "It's the air," he said, tapping his chest. "Too heavy to breathe right." At the time, I thought it was superstition, the way small towns wrap grief in folklore. I circled the house slowly, taking photos, until I noticed my reflection in the window's broken glass. My camera light was flickering, though I hadn't turned it on. I leaned closer, squinting through the crack in the boards, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement inside, a faint shape shifting between the shadows, the color of ash and silence. Then my camera shut off completely, and from somewhere behind the house came a sound like a breath drawn through teeth. 2 weeks after returning from the town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unfinished. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boarded house, the tricycle half sunk in the mud, the hollow space behind the windows. I spent my days digging through local archives, cold calling residents, and scrolling through forum threads about cursed towns and lost recordings. That was how I found her, an elderly woman named Margaret Vale who claimed to have cleaned out the old sheriff's office after it closed in the 80s. Her message was brief: "If you're really looking for the Marsh family, come alone. Bring cash." I met her in a diner off the interstate, where the lights flickered every few minutes, as though the wiring couldn't quite keep up with her voice. She slid a small showbox across the table, its cardboard soft from age, and refused to touch it once it left her hands. Inside were 3 cassette tapes labeled Marsh 1, Marsh 2, and Marsh 3. I asked where she got them, but she only said they were supposed to be burned. The first tape began with the sound of a man clearing his throat, then a child's laughter, distant but bright. The man spoke into the recorder, his tone calm and methodical, describing the date, the weather, the time of day. He sounded like someone documenting an experiment. Then came a second voice, female, sharp with irritation, telling him to stop recording and eat dinner. The rest of the tape was ordinary: the scrape of chairs, the hum of a refrigerator, a soft radio tune. It wasn't until the end that the background changed. The music faded, replaced by a low murmur that seemed to come from nowhere near the microphone. The voice wasn't speaking any recognizable language, more like a steady rhythm of breath and consonants, as though someone were whispering directly against the tape itself. I played the second cassette late that night, headphones pressed tight against my ears. This time, the man's voice was faster, his breathing uneven. He said the lights kept dimming in the hall, that he could hear the walls clicking like insects behind the plaster. He spoke to his wife, but she didn't respond. Instead, there was the sound of a door opening and closing, then silence until the same whispering returned, louder now, overlapping itself. My apartment felt smaller by the minute, the air thick with that static you only notice when you realize everything else has gone quiet. When the third tape clicked into place, I hesitated. The handwriting on its label was different, slanted and uneven, as if written by a trembling hand. The timestamp read only one word: after. Study listened to the third tape for the first time just after midnight, the apartment lit only by the faint blue of my computer screen. The cassette hissed for a long time before anything recognizable emerged, like the sound of air being drawn through an empty room. Then, faintly, came the man's voice again, but this time it was broken, whispering between gasps. He was saying someone was in the house, that the children were gone, that every time he turned a corner, the hallway stretched longer. Then the sound warped into something else: soft footsteps, a child's humming, and a woman's voice repeating a single word over and over. I couldn't make it out until the whisper sharpened, and I realized she was saying a name. My name. The recording sputtered, and for a moment, I thought the tape had jammed. But then came a sound that wasn't on the cassette at all, a low knock from somewhere inside my apartment. I froze, the headphones still on, waiting for it to repeat. It did, slower this time, as though whoever, or whatever, it was knew I was listening. The air felt different then, heavy and warm, like the apartment had filled with invisible breath. I turned off the recorder and waited, but the quiet didn't settle. The lights flickered once, twice, and the hum of my refrigerator stopped dead. Every hair on my arms lifted. It wasn't the kind of fear that makes you scream or run, it was the kind that sits deep in your chest, where you know something ancient has noticed you. I tried to shake it off as exhaustion, the kind that comes from staring too long at old horrors, but sleep wouldn't come. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear the faint scrape of the tape while spinning even though the recorder sat silent across the room. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to the faint hiss of static. The recorder's red light was blinking. The tape was moving, though I hadn't pressed play. The voice that emerged was softer this time, almost kind, whispering words I couldn't fully understand, but the cadence was unmistakable, it was trying to lull me. I reached to stop it, but before my fingers touched the button, the sound in the headphones shifted. The whisper grew clearer, closer, until I could feel it against my ear, a single word breathed with careful intent: listen. The morning light came in grey and thin, filtering through the blinds like dust caught in water. I remember blinking awake to the quiet hum of the recorder still running, though the tape had long since ended. The air was cold enough to mist my breath, and the clock on the wall read 3:17, frozen as if the power had died hours ago. My phone wouldn't turn on. Neither would the lights. I sat up slowly, every sound too sharp, the floorboards groaning as though they had aged overnight. The cassette deck was still spinning, the reel empty, turning in slow, deliberate circles. I pulled the plug from the wall, but the wheels didn't stop. That was when I noticed the smell, faint at first, metallic and sweet, like rust mixed with sugar. It came from the hallway, seeping under the door. I opened it, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement at the far end, a shape just outside the reach of the light, its edges wrong, the way reflections are when glass begins to bend. My voice didn't sound like mine when I called out. There was no answer, only the soft rhythm of breathing that didn't belong to me. I stepped backward into the living room, forcing myself to look away, but the whisper followed, low and steady, threading through the air like smoke. It wasn't coming from the hallway anymore. It was coming from the recorder. I stared at it, the reels still spinning, though the tape was gone, the voice spilling out of nowhere. It said my name again, then another, unfamiliar one, a man's voice beneath it, repeating a pattern I didn't recognize until it slowed into the same word over and over after. Something in me broke then, not out of terror but recognition, as if I'd finally understood the message that had been buried beneath the static all along. The whispering stopped. The apartment was still. I gathered the tapes, every note and clipping, and shoved them into my bag. I remember locking the door behind me, though the latch felt colder than metal should. I drove without direction, my hands stiff on the wheel, until the horizon began to pale. At the first gas station I found, I called my editor, told him I was done, that the story wasn't worth printing. He said I'd never sent him any drafts, never even filed for the trip. He thought I'd taken time off. Later that morning, someone found my car outside my building, engine still running, door wide open, the seatbelt dangling like an arm reaching for something just out of sight. On the passenger seat sat the recorder, its reel stopped mid-turn, and a single breath still echoing inside it.